Good afternoon. Thank you. Welcome to today's PD&R quarterly update and stakeholder huddle. I'm Kurt Usowski. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Economic Affairs. And I'm pinch hitting for Todd, who is somewhere over the Western Pacific today. Today, in addition to the update on economic and housing conditions around the country, we have a panel discussion on opportunity zones. Let me tell you about those a little bit. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act created new tax incentives for investments made in opportunity zones to spur economic development and job creation by encouraging long-term investment in low-income communities nationwide. Opportunity zones are census tracts that were determined by state executives to be the most in need of private investment. The Opportunity Zone designation encourages investment by granting investors extensive federal tax advantages for using their capital to finance new projects and enterprises located within Opportunity Zones. To ensure a successful implementation of this new tax incentive, President Trump created the 13-agency White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, chaired by HUD Secretary Ben Carson. So to tell us a little more about opportunity zones and how the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council is shaping them, please welcome Secretary Ben Carson.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for attending today. And I know on behalf of HUD, it's a privilege to give you some insight into some of the tremendous economic opportunities that exist for the people of this country, and particularly to talk about it before distinguished industry participants like yourselves. Now, under this administration, the American people are really experiencing tremendous empowerment at this point. You know, record low unemployment, jobs coming back, confidence, consumer confidence coming back, productivity, even manufacturing jobs. More jobs than there are people actually looking for jobs. So by all measures, this is the rising tide that floats all boats. But there seem to be some communities that don't seem to be benefiting as much. And this is a problem. You know, in his inaugural address, the president said, the forgotten men and women of this country will be forgotten no longer. We have to make sure that that's true. And it's critical, really, for all Americans to share in the gains that have been realized over this last couple of years. Now, at HUD, we're really encouraging public-private partnerships. We're encouraging all levels of cooperation, from the federal to the state to the local government, to the private sector, both for-profit and nonprofit, faith-based organizations, all working together to help solve these problems. And this afternoon, I want to share a little bit about how HUD is working to provide more opportunities for people through opportunity zones. You know, Abraham Lincoln observed once, you can't help the poor by destroying the rich, and you can't lift the wage earner by pulling down the wage payer. And I think he's right about that. But providing a pathway to self-sufficiency is really the only equitable and indeed the only effective way to address the lack of economic opportunities for our nation's most vulnerable communities. And one of our operating principles at HUD is that no individual or group of individuals should be abandoned, and no families should be forgotten. And all people in need have the ability to succeed in our nation, given the right incentives and the proper opportunities. You know, I can remember as a youngster, I didn't think that there was any possibility of my succeeding. You know, I was a terrible, terrible student. Other students loved having me around because I was the safety net. You didn't have to worry about getting the lowest mark as long as I was there. But, you know, I just really didn't think that I could succeed. And, you know, it was my mother who believed in me and said, Benjamin, you must be smart, much too smart to be bringing home grades like this. I brought them home anyway, but she was always saying that, and she was always being encouraging. And, but more than that, she made me read books. And as I started reading about explorers and scientists, surgeons and philosophers, I began to realize that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you is you. And it really completely changed the way that I looked at things. And, I really started enjoying academics at that point. And within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, much to the consternation of all those students who used to tease me and call me names. And now they were coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but it sure felt good to say that to those turkeys. But, the thing is, it was a change in attitude. But I also had people who reached out and tried to help me. Some of the teachers knew about the circumstances under which I was growing up, desperate poverty. And, they tried to connect me with opportunities. And they tried to keep me out of trouble. I'll never forget Miss Miller, Miss Schoenberg, before she got married. She just basically told me if I hung up with the wrong people, she would kill me. But, that helped. It helped me to get through all of that. But what we have to do now is not wait for opportunities for people, but we should actually create those opportunities for people. And there are few programs in modern American history that have the potential to touch the lives of as many people in as powerful a way as Opportunity Zones, where nearly 35 million Americans live, close to 10% of our population, 2.4 million HUD-assisted individuals in all 50 states and 5 territories. And the purpose of the Opportunity Zones obviously is to spur private capital investment into areas that have traditionally been neglected, and to do it over the long term. And that's really the difference between the Opportunity Zones and some of the other programs that we've seen spring up and disappear in the past. Because with the Opportunity Zones, you have to leave the money in to get the maximum benefit. Obviously, when you first invest the unrealized capital gains, you get a deferral of the tax payment. But if you leave it in for 5 years, you get a 10% decrement in the amount of capital gains tax you have to pay. If you leave it in for 7 years, 15%. Leave it in for 10 years, you have to pay no capital gains on the new money gained as a result of the investment. So, that is a tremendous incentive. But the best benefit is that you're taking money that is going to be invested in something anyway, and getting people to invest that in the areas that have traditionally been neglected in our society. And that, I think, has the potential to make a huge difference. The impact of the Opportunity Zone, it's not just theoretical. It's already here. The fund directory maintained by the National Council of State Housing Agencies released data last month that qualified Opportunity Zones have committed more than $29 billion in anticipated investments. Nearly 60% of those funds plan to invest directly in affordable and workforce housing or community revitalization. And, affordable housing, that's a topic I get excited about. I'm very excited. I don't show it because this is about excited as I look externally, but it's really an exciting concept. And as for direct impact, online real estate database Zillow shows that growth rates for property sales prices in some distressed communities have flipped from negative to a positive growth rate of 20% following Opportunity Zone designation. And the Labor Department data shows that counties with a larger presence of Opportunity Zones are showing faster wage growth than those with a smaller presence. And then just a couple of days ago, about 200 miles from here in Virginia Beach, developers broke ground on a brand new FHA-insured multifamily apartment complex again located in an opportunity zone. This project exemplifies what we're hoping to create, and that is opportunities for nurses, firemen, police officers, construction workers, other people to live in the same neighborhoods where they work without driving for very long distances. To ensure that opportunity zones reach their full potential, last December, President Trump signed an executive order which established the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, which I had the privilege of chairing. It consists of members from 16 different federal agencies and federal-state partnerships with a mission to make better use of public funds in the revitalization of these distressed communities. As of now, the Council has identified 160 programs that can increase targeting to opportunity zones through things like grant preference points and loan qualifications, fee reductions, and modification of eligibility criteria. And we've already implemented dozens of these actions across the agencies. The Revitalization Council is also conducting listening tours. We want to hear from all kinds of leaders, people like yourselves, entrepreneurs, investors, all the stakeholders. You know, the Bible says, in the multitude of counselors is safety. And as this program is rolling out, we obviously want to be safe in doing so. Now, one of the other actions at HUD involves our announcement last month by the FHA of a new package of incentives to encourage multifamily property owners to invest in opportunity zones. And the incentives include things like tens of thousands of dollars in reductions of exam fees, which are the application fees for the FHA mortgage insurance, as well as designating a team of experienced underwriters who can shepherd the application through efficiently. And of course, time is money, particularly in construction. And there are many challenges in the road ahead, and it's not going to be easy, but really nothing that is worthwhile is ever easy. So I'm really grateful to the people who are here in this room, partnering with HUD, and I encourage people who are not yet pursuing public-private partnerships to consider getting involved. There's really nothing that can stop us here in the United States from being successful as long as we remain united. You know, this is an incredibly strong country that we live in. No one can bring us down from the outside. We can only destroy ourselves from the inside. That'll never happen if we actually care about each other, if we care about those who, for whatever reason, find themselves in difficult situations, because our people are our most valuable resource. And if we develop them and they become strong and the communities become strong, then the nation becomes stronger. And the thing that always helps me when it comes to a difficult decision, just do what's right. Because if you do what's right versus what feels good, eventually they both become the same thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Before we get to our more in-depth discussion on opportunity zones, I have something completely different. Another bald economist with glasses and a beard, Kevin Kane, will talk to you about the economic and housing market conditions in the country during the current quarter. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So thank you, Kurt. Appreciate the introduction. And it's funny, my entire career here at HUD, I have worked under Kurt in some capacity. And they always say that a married couple, after you've been together for a while, start to maybe look similar look-alike. So if you look at Kurt and I, right, we both got the thin and top, both have the beards going on. Even today, we kind of dress the same. But the big difference between Kurt and I, for those folks who know Kurt, he is very much into physical fitness, rides his bike to the office every day. I, as you can tell, not so much into the physical fitness aspect. I'm more the case when I go to the metro, and if the escalator is not working, that's going to be a sick day. So, all right. So today we're going to give an update here on the national, regional, and local economic and housing market conditions across the country as of the first quarter. Before I begin, I'd like to thank three of our field economists, Randall Goodnight, Wendy Ip, and Marissa Dolan. They put together all the maps that you're going to see in my presentation this afternoon. We try to be consistent in the theme colors of the maps, where brown indicates worse off conditions or declines in a variable, and blue indicates better conditions or increases. First, we're going to look at the nation's economy, and then we will look at the sales and rental markets. So in this first slide, we see the year-over-year percentage change in non-farm payrolls since 2009, looking at both the 12-month moving average and the 3-month moving average through March of 2019. Non-farm payrolls are a measure of the number of jobs in the economy. The 12-month average is shown in blue, and the 3-month average is shown in red. During the 12 months ending March 2019, non-farm payrolls averaged 149.7 million jobs. This was up 1.7%, or 2.6 million jobs from a year ago. The rate of growth was up from 1.5% a year ago. The 3-month year-over-year average through March was up by 1.8%, and you can see that the red line is slightly above the blue line there in the figure. The total job gains during the first quarter were led by the education and health services sector, which added 532,000 new jobs. This was up 2.3%. And the professional and business services sector, which added 524,000 jobs, this was up by 2.6%. The mining and logging subsector had the fastest rate of growth in the country, up by 7.2% from a year ago, adding 50,000 new jobs. And the construction subsector had the second fastest rate of growth, up 3.9%, or 269,000 jobs. Every region in the country added jobs during the first quarter relative to a year ago, and you can see the entire country here shown in blue. The year-over-year rate of growth for the entire nation, again, was 1.8%. The three regions that are in darker blue grew at a faster rate than the national average. Growth was strongest in the Rocky Mountain and the Northwest regions at 2%. The Southeast had the largest net gain, adding 553,000 jobs. And on a state level, the fastest growing states were Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, which were up by 3.7%, 3%, and 2.6% respectively. Looking at the unemployment rate in the nation, the unemployment rate was 4.1% during the first quarter. This was down from 4.3% a year ago. Regions in blue had an average unemployment rate that was at or below the national average, while those in brown were above it, with the unemployment rate ranging from 3.5% in the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountain region to 5% in the Northwest. And on a state level, unemployment rates ranged from a low of 2.6% in Vermont to 7.4% in Alaska. Relative to a year ago, unemployment rates were down in 6 regions, and they were up 0.1 percentage points in 2 regions, and they remained unchanged in the other 2 regions. Among states, the largest decline in the unemployment rate was 0.8 percentage points, and that occurred in Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. Let me give a quick overview of current housing market conditions. Sales housing markets are generally a mixture of balanced to tight conditions around the country. As a bit of background, balanced conditions exist when the quantity of housing supplied equals the quantity demanded. We get soft markets when the quantity of housing supplied exceeds the quantity demanded and we have a surplus of housing. And we have tight markets when demand exceeds supply and we have a shortage of housing. All 3 home price indices show that home sales prices increased by about 4 to 5% from a year ago, and this rate of increase has been slowing. Home sales decreased by 3% during the 12 months ending March, and based on the current rate of home sales, there's a 5.6-month supply of new homes in the first quarter. That compares with a 5.4-month supply a year ago, and there's a 3.8-month supply of existing homes. That compares with a 3.6-month supply a year ago. The sales vacancy rate was 1.4% in the first quarter, and that was down from 1.5% a year ago. Apartment markets are relatively balanced around the country, but we do see some tightening in certain markets. According to Reese data, the national apartment vacancy rate was 4.8% in the first quarter. This was up 0.1 percentage points, and rents were up by 4.5% from a year ago. 51% of apartments that were completed in the fourth quarter of 2018 were absorbed in the first quarter of 2019. That compares with a rate of absorption of 48% a year ago. And multifamily permitting remained unchanged in the first quarter relative to a year ago. Let's take a look at regional conditions across the country. These are assessments provided by our field economists. Relative to last quarter, improvements in an area are shaded in blue, and declines in conditions are shaded in brown, and I'll explain what that yellow means here in a second. On the sales side, conditions remained a mix of balanced to tight. Some softer markets in New England have become more balanced, and in the Pacific, we had some slightly soft markets that have also become more balanced. In the Northwest, markets are now primarily tight. On the rental side, many apartment markets are balanced in the country, but there is a noticeable trend of tightening in certain regions. In the Southwest, Austin was previously balanced, but now has become slightly tight. In the Great Plains, the change was mixed, and that explains the yellow. So Wichita went from slightly soft to balanced, while Omaha continued to tighten. Conditions in the Rocky Mountains were balanced last quarter, but several markets experienced some kind of slight tightening, and that includes Casper, Greeley, and Rapid City. In the Pacific, urban Honolulu went from balanced to tight, and many markets in the Northwest are now tight, with Salem being very tight. This next figure here is going to show the 3 home price indices since 2009. And all 3 have shown year-over-year price increases since early to mid-2012, but the rate of growth has been slowing since 2018. In March 2019, the S&P Case-Shiller Index showed a gain of 3.7%. The FHFA index was up by 5%, and the CoreLogic index was up by 4.5%. All 3 of these indices were down by more than 2 percentage points from a year ago. So definitely slowing in the home price changes. Here we see a map showing the change in the monthly CoreLogic house price index on a state level from a year ago. Again, nationally, the increase was 4.5%. Prices were up in all states except for North Dakota, which was down by 4%, and that's the lone state there in brown. This is the second consecutive quarter where North Dakota has had a decline. Prices in the darker shades of blue increased the most, and that was led by Idaho, up 10%, Maine, up 9%, Nevada and Utah were up by 8%, and Indiana up 7%. All those states are shown in the darkest blue. We're seeing more price declines at the metropolitan, micropolitan, and division level than we have in the past. 74 areas experienced a decline in the first quarter. That compares with only 26 of those areas experiencing a decline last quarter. And according to the Census Bureau, the median price of a new home in the first quarter was $307,700. This was down 7% from a year ago. And according to the National Association of Realtors, the median price of an existing home was $254,800. That was up 4% from a year ago. Here we see the percent of home loans that are 90 or more days delinquent, in foreclosure, or in REO at the regional level as of March 2019. REO stands for real estate owned, which means that the lender now owns the property. The national average was 1.6% of all loans in those 3 categories. This was down from 2.2% a year ago. Foreclosures are not a problem in much of the country, and the rate continues to fall. The areas in blue are below the national average, while the areas in brown are above the national average. The highest concentration is in the New York, New Jersey region, which had a rate of 3%. This was the highest in the country, but this declined from a rate of 3.9% a year ago. And the largest decline occurred in the Southeast, where the rate was down 1.2 percentage points from a year ago. Based on CoreLogic data, new and existing home sales were down by 3% during the 12 months ending March 2019 compared with 1 year ago. Home sales were down in 8 regions, and you can see those in the 2 shades of brown. They were up in the Southwest, and they remained unchanged in the Southeast, those areas shown in blue. The regions in the darkest shade of brown declined by more than the national average, with the largest declines on the West Coast, the Pacific region down 9%, the Northwest by 8%. The light brown areas declined by less than the national average, and on a national level, new home sales were down by 6%, while traditional resales were down 2%. REO sales declined by 19% from a year ago, and short sales were down by 2%. On a state level, the largest decline occurred in Hawaii at 20%, followed by 10% declines in California, Maine, Oregon, and Washington. And the largest gain in sales occurred in Louisiana, which was up by 15%. This map shows the change in home sales by metropolitan area in the Northwest region, again, where sales declined by 8%. The darkest brown areas had the largest decline, more than 10%, while the blue areas had an increase. About 57% of the decline that occurred in this region occurred in the Seattle and Portland metropolitan areas, where sales were down by 15% and 11% respectively. On the building side, single-family home building, as measured by the number of building permits issued, decreased by 7% in the first quarter relative to a year ago, with 165,900 homes permitted. The number of homes permitted declined in all 10 regions. There were double-digit declines in half of those regions. The largest decline was 26% in the Great Plains, and this was followed by 18% in the Rocky Mountains. Approximately 40% of the decline in the Great Plains occurred in the Kansas City metropolitan area. New York, New Jersey, and the Southeast had minor declines of 2% and 1% respectively. Switching to the multifamily side, the number of multifamily units permitted remained unchanged at around 102,000 units relative to the first quarter of 2018. Multifamily permitting was up in 5 regions, and it was down in 5 regions. Increases were led by the Southwest and the Great Plains, which had gains of 26% and 11%, and the largest declines occurred in the Rocky Mountains, down 36%, and in New England, where multifamily permitting was down 29%. And despite the 3% decline in the Southeast, that region still accounts for 22% of all multifamily permitting in the United States. And now let's look at the nation's rental markets. This map shows the average apartment vacancy rates during the first quarter for each region. According to Reese data, the national apartment vacancy rate was 4.8%. Vacancy rates ranged from 3.9% in the Pacific to 5.7% in the Rocky Mountains and the Southwest. The 6 regions in blue had a vacancy rate that was above the national average, and the 4 in brown were below the national average. According to the Census Bureau for the entire United States, the overall rental vacancy rate was 7% in the first quarter, and this was unchanged from a year ago. This map shows the change in those vacancy rates relative to a year ago, and the national vacancy rate increased by 0.1 percentage points. The vacancy rate was up in 8 regions, with the areas in dark blue increasing by more than the national average, while those in light blue increased by the national average or remained unchanged. So you can see the Southwest there unchanged. Rates decreased in the Mid-Atlantic by 2 percentage points. The most significant increase in vacancy rates occurred in the Rocky Mountains, which was up by 0.8 percentage points. And among the 274 areas that are covered by Reese data, approximately 40% of those had an increase in the vacancy rate relative to a year ago. Take a closer look here at the Mid-Atlantic region, which was the only area to have a decline in the country. The regional apartment vacancy rate was 4.6%, which was down from 4.8% a year ago. And this map shows the change in vacancy rates for 24 metropolitan areas, where brown is a decline in the vacancy rate and blue indicates an increase or no change. Vacancy rates declined by 1.3 percentage points in the District of Columbia and by 0.6 percentage points in Pittsburgh. Rents were up by 4.5% nationally, according to Reese data. Rents grew in all regions of the country. You can see the whole country in blue. The 4 regions in darker blue increased faster than the national average, led by the Rocky Mountains, up 5.8%, and the Northwest, up 5.3%. The other 6 regions increased by less than the national average, with the smallest increase of 3.8% in both the Mid-Atlantic and in New England. The average market rent in the first quarter for the 274 areas covered by Reese was $1,451. Rents increased in 264 of the 274 areas, and you can see all those dots in blue. The darker blue areas increased by more. Rents only declined in 6 metropolitan areas in the country, and those are the 6 areas there shown in brown. There were 13 areas around the country that had double-digit increases in rents. Let's take a closer look now here at the Rocky Mountain region, where regional rent growth was 5.8%, and in the regional rent average was $1,279 in the Rocky Mountains. Rents in the Denver metro area were up by 5.9%, and in Salt Lake City they were up by 5.3%. And in keeping with our day's theme of opportunity zones, we've included an extra map here just so that you can get a sense of where those opportunity zones are across the country. So this shows the opportunity zones in the United States, in Puerto Rico, and also in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So in summary, year-over-year job growth for the first quarter was 1.8%. Sales markets are a mix of balanced to tight conditions in most of the country. Home prices were up by 4 to 5%, and home sales decreased by 3% relative to a year ago. Rental conditions are balanced in many markets around the country, and rents were up by 4.5%, and vacancy rates were up by 0.1%. For additional information, you can contact me, or you can contact your local field economist, and also check out our website, huduser.gov. Lots of good information and good reports can be found there as well. So at this time, it's my pleasure to hand things over to Erica, who's going to lead our panel discussion this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, and thank you to Secretary Carson for that great opening and context setting for our conversation today. Kevin, for that really informative presentation. It's wonderful to be back here among friends for the PD&R quarterly and stakeholder huddle. I was reflecting on the fact that we did the first PD&R quarterly about 10 years ago when I was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Development in PD&R. So this is Old Home Week, and it's great to be here. And I'm really grateful for HUD to shine a light on opportunity zones. It's an important moment for learning and reflection. We were just discussing in advance of this with the panelists that it's been 2 years, which seems like such a short period of time when you think about the evolution of a federal policy. And we're going to explore that more with the panel conversation in a moment. But this is a moment to really talk through how they can live up to their potential to be one of the most significant community development investments in the U.S., but also how to maximize inclusive community benefits as they roll out. Opportunity zones are not a traditional federal program as we think about them. Usually we think about the rules and the oversight, and sometimes they come with federal capacity building support. This is not the case with opportunity zones. Cities, counties, and even neighborhoods have to organize and position themselves to take advantage of this moment and really hope to channel that trajectory so that neighborhoods that have been starved of capital are now attracting capital. You're going to hear more from our fantastic panel in a moment, and I will introduce them. And we've organized a set of presentations to trace the policy development process that produced this incentive and gain more insight into the potential of opportunity zones. And then we'll have an engaging conversation on their perspectives about how opportunity zones can be leveraged for community benefit. But before we dive into our panel discussion, I've been asked to provide some framing remarks for today's conversation. And to do this, I want to set opportunity zones in a historical context, really laying out the problem that opportunity zones are trying to solve, but also the challenges to realizing their potential in a way that advances racial and economic equity. So what is the problem that opportunity zones are trying to solve? So nationally and locally, we know that private capital does not flow equally across places. This is true between cities in the US, between cities and rural areas in the US, like the difference between private sector investment in cities on the coast, but also the many cities in between and rural communities. But it's also true between neighborhoods and cities. And a lot of those differences are due to public and private decisions that have starved Black and brown neighborhoods of private capital over the decades. Now, capital is vitally important for communities. Businesses need it to expand. Families need the safe and stable housing that capital helps to develop. Cities need capital to maintain streets, parks, and amenities. Capital flows to communities through investments like business loans, home mortgages, and real estate investment that Kevin just described. And these investments are made both by private sector market investors and to a far lesser extent, mission investors like philanthropy. But federal, local, and county governments also invest capital. But as I just noted, capital doesn't flow to neighborhoods equally, and too many are starved for critical investment, as Secretary Carson noted. So for example, the Urban Institute just released an analysis of capital flows in my hometown of Chicago. The typical majority white neighborhood in Chicago receives 4.6 times as much market investment per household as a typical majority Black neighborhood, and 2.6 times as much investment as a typical majority Latino neighborhood. Even after all investments, not just private, are taken into account, majority white neighborhoods still receive 2.9 times as much investment per household as majority Black neighborhoods. And low poverty neighborhoods receive 2.6 times the investment as high poverty neighborhoods. So why isn't capital flowing equally to neighborhoods? The unequal patterns we see today are the legacy of federal policy and private sector practices that have long blocked capital to Black and brown communities. In his poignant analysis of this history, The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein documents how racially discriminatory practices like redlining and contract selling and urban renewal fostered segregation and steered investment away from communities of color, accelerating disinvestment. The resulting vacancy, abandonment, and concentration of poverty led to housing, business, and job markets becoming unstable. And taken together, these factors have made investments in these neighborhoods a big risk for most mainstream private sources of capital and financial institutions. As a result, major sources of capital have become scarce or more expensive, leading to a vicious cycle of disinvestment in communities of color. The legacy of those practices continues to present barriers to investment in communities of color today, even though the Civil Rights Act of 1968 outlawed outright discrimination and redlining. Last month, Joe Neary of IFF, a community development financial institution based in Chicago, published a piece in Shelter Force that illustrates just one of the ways in which the legacy of these policies continues to damage disinvested communities today. So using the example of a child care center seeking financing for new construction in a formerly redlined community, Neary points out how the legacy of redlining has forever lowered the appraisal value of land and properties in disinvested areas. So here's what happens. A child care center provider goes to a bank to apply for a loan to build a child care center on donated land. To assess the post-construction value of that center, the lender orders an appraisal which requires comparables from the neighborhood. But due to the long history of disinvestment, the value of those comparables will be lower than a neighborhood not affected by redlining, and the appraised value of the land will be lower too. This difference between the appraised value and what it costs to build the child care center means a bank considering a loan for 75% of the appraised value will loan this child care center far less than it would in a predominantly white or better resourced neighborhood where the value of comparables is higher thanks to decades of continued investment. Now that leaves the child care center in the formerly red line community with a bigger financing gap to fill and more money to fundraise than it would in a predominantly neighborhood with more decades of investment. So addressing the problem of unequal capital flows is particularly challenging because of the size of the gap between neighborhoods' access to capital is enormous. Continuing our Chicago example helps to demonstrate the scale. Urban's research noted that even though public and mission-driven actors, these would be philanthropy or the city or federal government, invested 10 times more per household in high-poverty neighborhoods than in low-poverty neighborhoods, the typical low-poverty neighborhood still receives over 4 times as much market investment per household as a typical high-poverty neighborhood. The amount of public and mission-driven capital in high-poverty neighborhoods does not come close to matching the volume of private capital that flows to low-poverty neighborhoods. Urban's analysis underscores how in practice this leaves residents with fewer amenities and services, increases the costs of getting a loan to start a business, and inhibits community wealth building. And this is where opportunity zones enter into the discussion. Opportunity zones are designed to spur investment in undercapitalized communities by attracting a new type of capital. Beyond traditional financial institution capital, it's the capital, as the Secretary noted, of high net worth individuals who have capital gains. And that capital gain can be invested in the kinds of community wealth building and asset building projects that we've described. And unlike previous policies, the Opportunity Zone tax incentive places very few restrictions on private investments that qualify under the policy. Real estate deals in opportunity zones, for instance, could attract new capital that should make those deals more attractive for traditional private capital investment and amplify their impact, thus increasing overall capital flows into the community and raising those appraised values that I was describing earlier. Now, our panel will discuss this in more detail. This incentive brings real potential, but also real questions that we're going to explore. Questions like, will investment flow to neighborhoods already gentrifying or to areas in more need of a tax incentive to boost investment? Will we have the reporting mechanisms in place to answer that question? How will projects advance local, racial, and economic equity goals? These are just a few of the questions that I'm excited to dive into today. I'm going to invite our panel to start to join me on the stage while I make introductions. And we'll have audience Q&A at the end. So begin to tee up your questions for our panel. The 5 panelists we have with us today are going to reflect on opportunity zones and how we can ensure that existing residents, businesses, and community organizations benefit from the expected influx of investment. I'm going to introduce them in the order that we're going to do the presentations. As I said, we have a very logical flow to this that I hope will work. Michael Kressig is a partner in the St. Louis office of Novogradac Company, where he specializes in the Opportunity Zone Incentive, the Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit, the New Markets Tax Credit, and the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. He has more than 25 years of public accounting and business advisory experience. His Opportunity Zone experience includes fund structuring, financial modeling and projections, developing compliance due diligence and asset management policies and procedures, and evaluating and structuring real estate and operating business portfolio investments, thinking about the new Opportunity Zone requirements. And he's going to give us a 101 to kick us off. Rachel Riley, to his left, serves as the Director of Impact Strategy for the Economic Innovation Group, which was one of the leading organizations to support the creation of opportunity zones and works to catalyze economic growth across the country through opportunity zones and other forward-thinking initiatives. Previously, Rachel was the Director of Impact Investing at Enterprise Community Partners, where she expanded community investment opportunities for people and businesses. Rachel was at the helm of Enterprise's engagement in opportunity zones, and her portfolio of work included leading Enterprise's $100 million million debt offering, the Impact Note, in addition to providing policy and advocacy activities related to impact investing. Frank Dixon, to Rachel's left, is Director of Strategic Business Initiative at Maryland's Department of Housing and Community Development. He leads DHCD's efforts in promoting and supporting investment into opportunity zones throughout Maryland. Frank works with investors, businesses, and local leaders to capitalize on opportunity zone tax incentives. Fran Siegel is to Frank's left. Fran is the Executive Director of the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance. The Alliance works to increase awareness of impact investing in the United States, foster deployment of impact capital across asset classes globally, and partner with stakeholders, including government, to build the impact investing ecosystem. Previously, Fran was the Chief Investment Officer and Managing Director of Investments at Impact Assets, where she headed investment management for the Giving Fund, which is an impact investing donor-advised fund. And last but not least, Dr. Robert Stoker is Professor of Political Science and a member of the faculty at the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration at George Washington University here in DC. And he specializes in the methods of policy analysis, program evaluation, implementation analysis, and analysis of U.S. social and urban policy. Professor Stoker has consulted with numerous government agencies and nonprofit organizations, has authored numerous articles and books, been a guest blogger on Huffington Post and Monkey Cage, writing about tax and social policy. And his most recent book, Urban Neighborhoods in a New Era, examines the politics of neighborhood revitalization in post-industrial cities. So you see, we have a terrific panel, and I'm going to hand it over to Michael to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Erica, and thank you to the folks at HUD and the Office of PD&R for putting on this event today and for the opportunity to participate. As Erica said, my name is Mike Kressig. I'm a partner with Nova Gradic. Nova Gradic is a national CPA and consulting firm with a deep expertise and focus in tax incentivized project finance, especially projects that include low-income housing, historic new markets, and renewable energy tax credits, as well as now opportunity zones. Nova Gradic got involved with opportunity zones very early on, first as a technical resource to the legislative sponsors of the incentive, and then in early 2017 we formed the Nova Gradic Opportunity Zone Working Group, which is now over 200 members in number, as a platform that's designed to facilitate collaborative thought leadership and stakeholder dialogue around primarily the technical and administrative issues that come up as we try to apply the program. Additionally, we serve as a united voice in speaking to the Treasury Department and the IRS, as well as other federal and state agencies that are involved in administering the program. So Erica asked me to speak to the policy and legislative intent of the incentive and give a brief synopsis of the history of the policy. And as previous speakers have noted, the Opportunity Zone tax policy is really a concept that was the brainchild of the Economic Innovation Group, EIG, of whom Rachel is now a representative, in response to the well-documented geographic disparity of income growth and economic growth that's occurred in the country over the last 2 to 3 decades. And the policy creates, as others have noted, a tax incentive to encourage the investment of patient equity capital into these distressed communities, thereby catalyzing economic activity in those communities and providing greater economic and income opportunity for the people that live and work in those communities. And the way the incentive works, and Secretary Carson touched on this a little bit, but the way that the incentive works is that it allows taxpayers with capital gains to make an election to defer those gains by investing them in qualified opportunity funds that within 180 days of their realization event. That affords them three primary tax benefits. The first of those benefits is that they are able to defer the taxable income, the gain, until the earlier of the date that they dispose of the qualified opportunity fund investment, or December 31, 2026. The second of the benefits that it affords is a partial forgiveness of the taxable income, 10% for those investments that are held for 5 years, and an additional 5% for investments that are held for an additional 2 years, 7 cumulatively. And the third benefit is that it allows a taxpayer to exclude from gain entirely the appreciation in the value of the investment if they hold the investment for 10 years. So, a brief history. In February of 2017, Senators Tim Scott of South Carolina and Cory Booker of New Jersey collaborated to introduce the Investing in Opportunities Act, which was a standalone piece of legislation that was really designed to be teed up for later inclusion in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which, as it turns out, was in fact a successful strategy, as the code section 1400Z was really, this original legislation was really the blueprint for that. And as we all know now, at the end of 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was signed into law, and opportunity zones became law. So then we turn the calendar from 2017 to 2018, and we have this potentially powerful and transformative new tax incentive, with the frustration that then accompanies it being that we don't really know how it works. So we have, over the last 15 to 18 months, our Department of Treasury has worked feverishly to put out regulations, and about 2 months ago they put out a second set of regulations, which combined with the first set, I think really gives us a lot of clarity that we were looking for as tax advisors and as fund managers and as investors, to be able to successfully make these, to feel good about making these investments. So as we convene here today, we're about to see the first significant wave of opportunity zone investment activity. In the next 8 days, as we approach the 180th day of 2019, billions of dollars of capital gains that were reported to taxpayers on their K-1s at the end of 2018 will flow into qualified opportunity funds. And those funds will then have until the end of the year to deploy that capital into opportunity zones. So although the opportunity zone incentive has now been with us for 1.5 years, I really feel like we have our hands on the on the switch, and we are actually flipping it right now. And so I really feel like we're at the beginning of the program.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Rachel.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I really appreciate Michael doing the heavy lifting on describing the tax benefit, and also Erica for your intro remarks, because a point that you touched on just really resonates with me, and it's just something I want to share, that investment in community. If you live in a community where you're not seeing the capital markets investing in your neighborhood, it has a direct impact on how you view your own self-worth. And I know that to be true. And so as we see the potential for increased investment in these communities, I do hope and I think that it will signal to the residents and businesses of these communities that people see value in their neighborhood, and they see value and potential in those businesses and residents, But the key is how it's done and whether it's done thoughtfully and community aligned. And I call it smart investment. Smart investment is data-driven, community-informed investment. And that's what we're really striving for at the Economic Innovation Group, which, by the way, if folks aren't familiar, we are a bipartisan policy think tank located here in Washington, D.C., really working to empower entrepreneurs and investors to help forge a more dynamic American economy. Not just on the coast, not just in metro markets, but really throughout, so that everyone can achieve what we think is their true potential and have investment in that. So I'm gonna fight with this clicker and hope I win. That was a joke, guys.
I know.
I think maybe Maryland's opportunity zones. Yeah.
Oh, those are mine.
Oh, you guys, look, this is a preview. Okay, so what I want to share is that my slide was super exciting. It's a secret. No, so a map that I was going to show was an internal map that we have at EIG where we're tracking, as we're hearing anecdotally, state initiatives, investments that are aligned for impact and funds that are aligned for impact. And if everyone wants to close their eyes and imagine this very cool slide, it looks like chicken pox, which is probably not the reference I should be making, but there's a lot of activity that's happening right now that maybe you're not going to be reading in the headlines, but that has spurred a lot of innovation and creative problem solving throughout the communities. And I want to cite Birmingham, Alabama, for really being on the forefront of thinking about how to engage residents. They've committed to educating 500 residents by next year on opportunity zones. And that's important because it puts opportunity zones as a tool in the hands of the community to look at a vacant property, to look at a vacant building and say, what could that be? And it's the creative problem solving piece that I think is really critical. And so as we look at achieving equitable outcomes through opportunity zones, there's multiple ways to plug into this and bake equity in throughout the life cycle of an investment. So on the outset, engagement, how states and localities are thinking about layering other incentives, how they're thinking about leveraging their land, as well as how communities feel they are engaged or not engaged is really going to determine the long-term equitable outcomes of how opportunity zone investments are made. At the transaction level, so once money is being moved, now that we have the really great regs in place, or at least proposed, what are the opportunities for communities to help inform those investments and invest alongside investors? There's a great initiative called Our Opportunity that is looking to help allow opportunities for the community to invest alongside high net worth individuals and other general partners in these funds. So this is the innovation that's happening. It's very, very exciting. And then at exit, let's talk about responsible exits out of opportunity funds in a way that's not extracting the value that's been created in these communities. And a lot of that is around responsible exits and pre-negotiated exits, thinking about not just return, but also who's going to own that asset once investors are looking for the return on their funds. So after year 10, most likely, who retains the first right of refusal to that asset? Are terms pre-negotiated at the transaction period in order to help inform and prepare communities for the investment exit? So that being said, the thing that I also want to share is that we're seeing this already happen. This innovation is happening throughout the nation, and specifically putting housing squarely in the middle of how investment in housing can be done for equitable outcomes. I just want to share a few examples. Okay. So one of the ways I'm thinking about equitable outcomes is access to higher education. So there is a deal in Appalachia which is building student housing, and that may not necessarily be the first thing you think about when you think about housing and equity, but that housing is going to provide access to education for a broader audience and for a broader beneficiary group, and that's really important. There's a model in Memphis right now that is doing lease-to-own home ownership, and they're working with the Tennessee Housing and Development Agency in order to provide mortgages for that lease-to-own model. And over the 3 years you're doing the lease-to-own, they're doing borrower readiness and preparedness and education. So when you have that mortgage, that takeout financing, hopefully this will be successful. So homeownership is happening with opportunity zones. Charlottesville, the Habitat for Humanity affiliate in Charlottesville has said that opportunity zone equity being baked into their deal allowed them to go from a surface level parking lot to a structured parking garage, which created more green space for their residents where they'll do programming. It also allowed them to do more thoughtful design around how the housing looks. And there's just a lot more. Teachers Village, those are homes for teachers. And I look forward to continue to sharing. I get very excited, just like Secretary Carson. So I could share a lot more.
It's very visible and visceral. So. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rachel. Frank. And these are your slides, I think.
These are my slides.
I apologize to Rachel.
If I go right, I go right. Okay, good.
Go.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm going to give you just a focus on Maryland. There are many other good examples of states that are out there that are, I would say, pro-opportunity zones. I know Maryland is all in. The Secretary Ken Holt, a previous financial person, believes that bringing in capital to where there are needs, there's going to be a shared return, not only for the investors, but for where the capital's going. Just one comment, this is still a marketplace, and so Maryland looked at the places that they were choosing out of the opportunity zones, and this is a map here. It's a little bit better than the previous map that the economists gave, where you didn't look like you could see opportunity zones in Maryland. It looked like it was pretty brown, but they're there, they exist. There are 149 of them out of 593 to choose from. And so what that means is even of the 149 that were chosen, obviously there's several hundred that didn't get chosen. And so unfortunately, there are probably more opportunities that need money, and there's not enough money to go around. But I think this is a good start. And what the governor did is that he, even though he's a Republican, he was Democratic about it, saying every county within Maryland would get at least one opportunity zone. And so that's why you see the geographical spread here, both in the western side of Maryland as well as the eastern shore near the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. And so one of the general themes, which was recommended by the folks that sort of put forward opportunity zones, is to focus on anchor institutions and existing investment that's going in to certain areas. And so I'm going to do a flip here to the next slide. And focusing on Baltimore because it's Maryland's major city, but the same themes were implemented throughout the state. And what we looked at is that we wanted to go into areas, not only industrial areas, because you can get the business activity that may not help people who are, typically in industrial areas, people are not living there, but you're going to increase the tax base that's going to be able to support all the folks within the city. So from an economic perspective, that was a reasoning for focusing in on industrial areas. But also near anchor institutions or business incubators where there's going to be the likelihood that an early stage business would locate near an academic institution, whether that be Johns Hopkins University, whether that be the University of Maryland, Baltimore, or other academic institutions that would license out their technologies to new companies that would create jobs. And so that's one economic aspect to do it. As the earlier economist noted in the job growth is that the medical institutions or healthcare had a significant uptick. Baltimore specifically has a lot of healthcare institutions, premier healthcare institutions, as well as I would say the basic or average R&D institutions that are creating advances for humankind, but it also enables people to invest and make money off of those licenses. And so that was another thought process of selecting opportunity zones where there are anchor institutions, academic institutions, and existing activity. Another major theme was transit-oriented development, so looking at places where there had already been significant planning. So close to here, New Carrollton, which is has a metro station, Amtrak, that is a place that is an opportunity zone, and there's significant activity going on. They just closed a multifamily deal with opportunity zone equity in it. And so those are some of the sort of themes for actually selecting the opportunity zone specifically with Maryland. As it relates to what Maryland's doing from a funding perspective, and many other states are doing this, and I think we're taking some of the lead from HUD, is that we're giving some priority to existing programs that are taking applications, priority to those projects or applications that are in opportunity zones. And then secondly, the governor did put forth a budget as well as legislation that would help support investment in opportunity zones. One is expanding existing programs to include opportunity zones if they weren't included from a geographic perspective. Another is actual financial dollars to support those. And so those are just some of the primary things. We did create a tool, and this is an information exchange to help match investors to projects. And that's another thing is to be able to, in this case, it's awareness of where to put investment dollars. So thank you very much.
That's terrific. Thank you for grounding it for us and also demonstrating how states and localities can align other resources. So Fran is going to give us her perspective on reporting and other work that the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance is doing.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hello. I'm Fran Siegel, Executive Director of the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance, which is a field-building organization focused on catalyzing more capital, private capital for public good. Our members represent about 1,000 high-net-worth individuals and institutional investors, including foundations, pension funds, insurance companies, and others that really seek to deploy this private capital for public good that the Secretary was talking about earlier. We connected early on through the Economic Innovation Group in May of 2017. Saw early that this would potentially be the first community investment incentive since New Markets Tax Credit could have the potential, as Michael was talking about earlier, to catalyze kind of a new cohort of impact investors into community investment. So we honed in on a couple of different key aspects. One was the importance of access to market data around market formation. We've talked about the fact that this is not a program, this is really a market. Transparency around impact outcomes and rigorous evaluation, which Robert will talk about in a second. As you probably know, the original legislation had reporting requirements baked in and for parliamentary reasons was stripped out. And so while we remain hopeful that the Treasury Department will work to create some clear federal reporting standards, we also felt that it was really important to work with private sector folks to mobilize and organize around the importance of data and community engagement. Back in July, we did a convening that some of you may have been at the New York Federal Reserve Bank, where we gathered 40 practitioners to talk about what a consistent national approach would look like to impact accountability and reporting, and a few design principles emerged. A few design principles emerge. First is that impact transparency and accountability should be designed to promote authentic community engagement. So that's a motif I think that we'll all continue to hit on. Second, access to data to facilitate efficient market formation. That any approach needed to be flexible and applicable across diverse markets, whether it's small business investments, range of real estate investments, and that ideally a private sector standard would be undergirded by a federal standard that, again, we're still hoping for. So coming out of that session at the Fed, we partnered with the Fed and the Beck Center at Georgetown to develop something that we call the Opportunity Zones Reporting Framework, which consists of a set of first principles with an impact management framework meant to guide fund managers in responsible deployment of opportunity zone capital in communities. And though it's written really targeting fund managers, a tool for fund managers, we believe that it can serve as a guide to investors, wealth advisors, state and local governments, and community stakeholders who seek to partner with this new source of capital that's coming into communities. And Rachel actually touched really nicely on how we think about engagement around the Opportunity Zone reporting framework, and we think about it through the life cycle of an investment. So I don't want to repeat exactly what Rachel said, but just if I can touch on a couple of points. So even before the first dollar is deployed, and in our mind, even before fund inception, we think that it's important for fund managers to be committed to clear principles like community engagement, transparency, and shared equity. As project sourcing begins, fund managers and investors should work with local stakeholders to understand what their local priorities are. We fundamentally believe that community engagement, responsible community engagement, can, of course, improve community outcomes of some of these investments, but also mitigate risk and drive financial return. We see these as inextricably bound. Then during the investment, we ask that impact be tracked diligently. We talked earlier about jobs, we talked about community economic development indicators, and so we're not asking for anything crazy here in this Opportunity Zone reporting framework. These are metrics that any opportunity fund manager would be gathering and reporting on to their LPs in the normal course of business. But we ask fund managers to think about commitments to affordability and anti-displacement strategies through their developments in investments. And then finally, I just want to echo what Rachel said about exit and responsible exits. Do I have 30 more seconds to wrap?
Yep.
Okay. So I know that we have a lot of federal partners in the room that really understand the complexity of performing rigorous impact assessments. And we have, again, taken pains in this Opportunity Zone reporting framework not to create an overburdensome private standard. But we believe that data is critical to informing market actors, and done right, a reporting standard for opportunity zones we believe will be a critical component of long-term success for communities, as well as ensuring the long-term viability of the opportunity zone benefit. So already we've had some fund managers, some communities, and others sign on to our framework. 2 fund managers, Arcturus Impact Fund and Community Capital Management, in partnership with the Kresge Foundation, have agreed to report on key impact metrics to align with the Opportunity Zones reporting framework. In Alabama and Cleveland, local organizers are using the framework as one input in developing project identification tools. So I just hope, again, that our federal partners are thinking about the tools that they have that can be a leverage to inform and encourage opportunity fund investors and managers, and just that we're at a pivotal moment and we all need to work together to shape this market at inception.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think you really made the case for this inflection point that we're at. And Robert, please bring us home in this discussion before we get into a more engaged dialogue.
Thank you. I want to thank HUD and the Office of Policy Development and Research for inviting me today. I want to also acknowledge that whatever I know about urban revitalization, I have learned with colleagues, Michael Rich from Emory University, Clarence Stone, Professor Emeritus from the University of Maryland. I've been asked to talk about evaluating opportunity zones. And as a person who is concerned about urban revitalization and who believes that there is a significant problem with a lack of capital investment in distressed communities, I'm inclined to be favorably disposed toward the Opportunity Zone initiative. However, as an evaluator who is concerned about the effectiveness of urban revitalization initiatives, I have some significant concerns. The first thing that I would like to emphasize is that the question of evaluating place-based incentives to encourage urban revitalization, in part through investment, is a long-standing concern among urban policy analysts. While it is true that there are elements of the Opportunity Zone initiative that are distinctive and innovative, there also is a long history of urban revitalization initiatives that have used tax incentives, among other tools, to encourage investment in distressed communities and to try to revitalize urban communities. The results of those evaluations are largely inconclusive. So if you look back at state enterprise zones that have been popular and ongoing initiatives since the 1980s, empowerment zones and enterprise communities that were implemented as federal policies in a variety of different areas during the 1990s, and the Renewal Community Initiative that began in 2001. We have a long history of looking at similar initiatives, and the results are inconclusive. The findings of evaluations typically assert that while there is evidence that these interventions have improved conditions in the designated zones, that evidence is normally insufficient to conclude that the program worked. So it's a significant question, given this history, whether or not we will learn about opportunity zones. And of course, efforts like Fran's to create a framework for reporting can only be viewed as constructive steps toward that end. It's important to recognize, however, that while the results of evaluations are inconclusive, it's really difficult to do evaluations of place-based initiatives. There's tension at the very core of this initiative, tension about the goals. Who is supposed to benefit? What would it mean for the program to work? Is it sufficient to have investment dollars flowing into distressed communities? Or do there have to be additional indicators that suggest that members of the community are themselves benefiting from the flow of investment dollars? Beyond this, policy that works may nonetheless have troubling consequences in distressed communities. Tax incentives may redistribute investment locally rather than really generating new investment. Residents of distressed communities may suffer adverse consequences from increased investment. If the program works, there may be adverse consequences. If property values increase, living costs may increase, long-term residents may be displaced from distressed neighborhoods. I know that, as Fran indicated, this is one concern that they are trying to reflect in the framework for reporting that they are developing. If residents are poor, unemployed, or otherwise not active in the labor market, the negative consequences that they experience as a result of program success may be misinterpreted as positive program benefits. We could observe that poverty goes down in designated zones, that incomes in targeted areas go up following the implementation of the initiative. And this may be a reflection of suffering of people who are currently living in those communities. There are a variety of other methodological concerns, however, aside from just difficulty defining the goals of the initiative. There is difficulty anticipating the counterfactual condition. In evaluation research, the counterfactual condition represents what would have happened in the absence of the intervention. Given that this initiative was organized to be implemented on the census tract level, it's obvious that the intention of policymakers was to find similar non-designated census tracts that would be used as a basis for comparison. However, that strategy does not reflect the fact that there will be significant variation in terms of the local implementation of these programs. As Frank suggested in Maryland, Maryland is already deploying other tax incentives and other programmatic activities to augment the opportunity zones. That means that we're going to have to do a very careful, detailed evaluation of the nature of the intervention to even determine what an opportunity zone is.
Terrific. Thank you for leaving us on that sobering but important note.
I'm the skunk at the party. I'm sorry.
Coming from a research organization, I definitely felt some affinity with those comments. But want to spend just a little bit of time now engaged on a couple of additional points that were threads that you heard across the panelists before we turn to you for your questions, and anybody who's joining us via webcast and wants to email for a question, I think the instructions are there for you to do that too, and we welcome those as well. So a number of you mentioned community benefit and how and I think you raised, Robert, really important points about even how to understand what the intent is, but also what the consequences or benefits might be. I want to, Frank, turn to you first to reflect on what will it take? I think you did a really nice job of describing your strategy, but what will it take to align opportunity zones with community needs that also support inclusive growth? If you could unpack a little bit more of like the inside baseball on that. Yeah.
I think, and just to be clear, opportunity zones is, one tool in the toolkit that can be used. It's something new. It's something that folks are going to look at, and some investors are going to participate and some are not. I mean, as it relates to sort of the community benefit, and one of the reasons that the governor proposed and passed budgeting to help support other programs, they're going to be complementary to investment that's going in, and so some of that is workforce training, and so you need for people who don't have skills, who are unemployed, they're not going to get a job unless they have skills. It's a competitive market. As you can see, the unemployment rate's going down, so they have to be able to compete like anybody else. And as Dr. Carson said, it's the you that gets people to that next step. But they also need support, whether that's guidance, whether that's funding, a good school to go to, all those basic things. And so some of the programs that we support within Department of Housing, we don't support market rate people. We're supporting those that are in need. Many of the programs are not only funding for the housing themselves, the construction, but it's loans to businesses that actually provide a community benefit. I think the key thing for communities is that, and some are more organized and are ahead of the game, and others are not, and they probably need that capacity building to help them put their plan out. An example is that there's the community in Baltimore where they already have a benefit statement, and the community is going to benefit financially if their opportunity zone does well. I mean, they're going to get monies to help their programs and that they need to fund to help their people, whether it's going to the schools or not. And so I think one of the things that we could do better, I'm coming more from an investment background, but some of the things that we could do as a state or other people is actually have maybe a more prescribed program to enable communities to actually do that capacity building.
That's a great example. I'm wondering, Fran or Rachel, if you're seeing other examples like that in Maryland.
And just to be clear, are you describing the Baltimore, the Port Covington deal that has a community benefits agreement associated with it?
That's correct.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to clarify that for my own sake. And Robert, I want to thank you. Your presentation embodied everything that keeps me up at night and what's kept me at the table for the past 18 months as a community development practitioner and so interested in opportunity zones and its ultimate implementation. And to that end around community benefit, we do need to understand how investments are being made. And I also want to thank Robert for citing the paper that we did that provided some critiques around previous place-based initiatives in even introducing the opportunity zone incentive, and that the original legislation always had, as Fran mentioned, some metrics around impact reporting and understanding how investments are being made. And so with that context, I think one of the most important things we can continue to be doing at the Economic Innovation Group, understanding those concerns, is continuing to push for that transparency, just as we are. We are a huge supporter of the legislation that was just introduced in May from the original co-sponsors that introduced again this need for impact reporting and understanding how investments are being made, and expanded the level of transparency that we're asking for from these opportunity funds. And in addition to that, we have an Opportunity Zone Coalition of more than 80 members who we jointly just submitted a response to the request for information on data collection. And we cited that exact report around the critique of previous place-based initiatives being a lack of reporting required. So it put us as a nation in a position to where we couldn't properly assess the efficacy of those programs. So I just want to assure folks that there's community benefit, but then there's also investment transparency and data collection, which we think all of which are necessary to make this hit communities in a way that is rising tide lifts all boats and promotes inclusive and equitable growth.
And Fran, maybe I want to bring in this issue of data and evaluation into the same question, and even ask, as you looked at your framework, and Robert would love you to weigh in on this too, what would you want or need to know from this data that I think you described some private actors are already starting to collect that. We want that to be more systematic. But what would you want to know to indicate that the policy might need a course correction? What would be some of the leading indicators of that would you would want to call out?
Sure. Yeah, so we're all beating the drum on the need for data, especially Robert. He needs the inputs that it's not just for ex post, it's also for market formation. So just again, one more call for access to timely and disaggregated data. Currently, the Treasury Department has been talking about aggregated data issued in 5-year increments, and we don't think that won't serve Robert's needs, I bet. But it is not also going to serve, nor will it serve the need for fund formation and capital deployment. But this combination of a new tool, an equity vehicle in communities, so it's a new tool, investing in new communities for many of these fund managers, investors, and still some uncertainty on the regulation, make transparency and accountability key to forming the market. Michael talked about it earlier. I think that jobs are key. So, and also not just a more nuanced approach to jobs. So how many jobs are created, but also the types of jobs. Are they permanent or temporary? Are they paying a living wage? Are they employing local residents? Or are we having residents from other census tracts just commuting to these areas? So that's just some. I'm sure you have more detailed ideas about data needed, and also what would be early indications of something not bearing out.
I think the clear early indication is whether or not investment is flowing into the designated zones. That would be the first early indication. But I think there's a great irony here, which is that Frank talked about how the governor wanted to assure that the opportunity zones worked, and talked about how it was just one tool in a kit that they might deploy to improve distressed neighborhoods, and that's good government. They're doing the right thing. But from an evaluator's perspective, what they're doing is they're muddling the nature of the treatment. They're making something that happens in one locality different from what's happening in another locality. And that makes it really difficult to do an evaluation that's systematic, because you need all of this information, like who's getting jobs, what are they getting, where do they live, and that's a tremendous amount of information to collect. I'm not sure it's reasonable to expect private sector actors to do that. It's a tremendous information burden. I mean, it would be wonderful if they would, but I'm skeptical. The great irony then is that good government practices, like Frank was describing, undermine our potential to learn about this initiative.
Can I just get?
I'd rather just get money in Maryland. From my perspective, we're competing against the other states, and so we want to be competitive. We want to help the communities. We may muddle what is it cause and effect as it relates to opportunity zones versus is it all these other things that are contributing to it? But I think from our perspective, even if they don't go to an opportunity zone and invest, maybe they'll go to a non-opportunity zone and invest. That's still more tax dollars for Maryland, of which then they can spend on supporting Maryland citizens. So from that perspective, the boat still is going to rise, even though it doesn't answer Robert's question.
Right. Rachel, did you want to?
There's a low-income housing tax credit deal in Missoula, Montana right now, that because the equity was front-loaded into the deal through opportunity zones, they didn't have to take a construction loan out, and they got to reduce their bridge financing. That netted a $1 million cost savings to that deal. That is more equity, more credits that could go to create additional affordable housing that is not going to that deal because they were able to net $1 million cost savings. To me, that feels like good public policy, but that is just one example. But I want to offer that example because that's real time, it's happening, it's something that I think we need to maybe even shift the paradigm about what it means to have impact, what it means to create equitable outcomes, and what sort of investments are needed in communities in order to do that.
Did you want to jump in on that, Fran?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to make a shout out to rural communities and the most distressed communities, because I think that, we've talked to Novogradac and others about, likely waves of fund introductions, real estate first. We're all hoping for small business funds in a second wave. And we heard from the secretary that their property values are already going up in the quote unquote hottest opportunity zones, and I can just imagine what Robert's thought bubble is there. And then we hear about the Revitalization Council also trying to align federal programs while state and local governments are also trying to align to draw. There's this competition, as you talked about, to draw opportunity zone capital and fund managers to your locality. And so what is the business models and what are the incentives that we can use to draw capital to rural communities? And once the kind of hot deals are picked off, which they will be in relatively short order, I believe, how can we draw capital to some of these low to moderate distressed communities and to rural communities?
Yeah, thank you. In a moment, I'm going to go to you for your question. So this is your invitation to start to think about that in the audience and ask one last question for the panel, but I'll set it up as a bridge to this last one. So we've been doing, as my earlier comments noted, a lot of work in Chicago because Chicago ended up picking, and my colleague Brett Theodos did this analysis across the United States, a kind of a capital index score to identify which opportunity zones or census tracts in the United States had the least amount of capital flowing into them as a way to inform the selection of opportunity zones, hoping that states would pick the ones with the least amount of capital. That wasn't, in fact, always the case, right? And this gets to the national competition. Some states picked places where there was actually capital flow happening, but they still met the designation. So Chicago actually picked places that had very low capital flow. So there was a real concern about how they're going to compete with other census tracts and opportunity zones around the country that might pencil out better. And so philanthropy really organized to help equip the city to figure out how to make the most of this opportunity and position the opportunity zones in Chicago to be able to capture the interest of other investors, given the zones that they had selected. So what are some of the other ways in which you've seen this kind of cross-sector collaboration? And I know philanthropy has been playing a role in some places nationally and locally, and Fran would go to you first, and then others who want to weigh in on the kind of tools or incentives or other ways in which other sectors can support, especially those zones that need the most capital.
Yeah, so the Alliance runs a group called the President's Council on Impact Investing. It's a group of 20 U.S. foundation presidents who care about private capital for public good. And we've been talking to them and other philanthropic stakeholders for a while about the opportunity of opportunity zones, including community foundations, by the way, who have deep expertise in working with the communities in which they live and reside and serve. And we've seen some activity, but certainly not enough for our taste. So Ben Siegel, who is the Opportunity Zone coordinator in Baltimore, is funded by a local foundation. We saw Rockefeller Foundation at the recent Forbes event, an Opportunity Zone Summit, announce that they are going to fund a chief opportunity zone officer at Newark, in Newark. And so I think one of the things we see, not everyone has a kind of a Frank or a Ben Siegel at the helm, and we see desperately the need for folks who are skilled in deals and in interacting with capital markets players. And so that's a way for foundations to participate. Rockefeller and Kresge Foundation did a call for letters of intent among fund managers, and in 90 days they got 140 responses. And Kresge picked several of them to offer first loss guarantees or downside risk mitigation as a way of privileging the impactful actors. And Sorensen Impact Center at the University of Utah is issuing a Catalyst Challenge, and so every year they will honor 2 communities and 2 fund managers that have best practices. So I think philanthropy can fund skills. They can fund kind of market-making activities like this first loss guarantee, and they can also lift up best practices like this Catalyst Challenge, but we need more.
Great. Other ideas for philanthropy or other sectors engagement?
I would only suggest that my research on urban revitalization suggests that there's tremendous variation locally in terms of some communities that are advantaged by having active philanthropic actors that are very well resourced, who are engaged in local community development efforts, but other places are not. This is another illustration of how good governance, ironically, will make it difficult to know what an opportunity zone is and how to evaluate it.
Excellent point. So we're going to turn to audience questions. I want to remind those of you who are joining us on the webcast, we want to make sure you're included. You can email PDR quarterly update at hud.gov if you have a question for the panel. But let us first go to the room, and if you would please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Linda Bronston. I work in the Policy Office for Public Housing. But I know an awful lot of those green areas that are in Maryland, and some of them are very highly developed and some of them are very not highly developed. So is rezoning of land anticipated, and will the state always be involved during those investment deals? Those are 2 different questions.
Yeah, it's at the local level is where zoning is going to happen.
Obviously,
right?
yeah, but
and
so are you
the state's-
anticipating that?
So the state's not going to get involved from a zoning perspective. Do I anticipate that where there's undeveloped land that it would actually get rezoned for whatever purposes? Yeah, probably. That's a normal course of business, whether it's opportunity zone or not. And so, yeah, I think that probably will happen. I think in the industrial areas that I showed, there'll probably be rezoning where potentially there's going to be residential as opposed to just industrial. That's happened in Baltimore and will continue to happen in Baltimore, where there's actual land availability that is not being used today and could be repurposed for sure.
But if somebody wants to invest, is your office going to be engaged?
So, yeah, certainly we're going to be engaged. We're engaged in it is a dual strategy. We're the lead agency, Department of Housing. We focus mostly on housing, but we're working with commerce from a business activity. We work with the other departments to help support the other needs, whether that be labor from a workforce development perspective. But yes, we would be. At the end of the day, though, it's going to be the locals that are running it. If they come to the state for support, financial support, and if it's a program that housing has, then certainly they're going to come to us and look. For example, we're supporting a pending application that's going to close probably in a couple of days, where they're doing low-income housing tax credits. They're borrowing money from us, and they have opportunity zone research equity dollars that are filling the gap that they needed to be able to do that deal, and that's for an affordable housing project in the Frederick area.
Great. Thank you for that question. Next.
Thank you. I'm Ann Canfield with Michael Best Strategies here in Washington, D.C. In the commentary or the comment letters that were filed by the National League of Cities, National Governors Association, Build America Mutual, and another municipal finance trade association in the last round, They said that it turns out it's going to need to be a statutory change, but that in order for the harder to serve communities to actually get developed, debt is going to have to be allowed for the funds to be allowed to invest in debt, like GO debt. And part of the problem here is that in the harder to serve communities, in order to put in the necessary infrastructure to get to attract the investment, they have to issue bonds. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. Their voters won't necessarily approve those bonds. And so if the fund could invest even in GO debt, you might really help the development of the harder to serve areas. And without it, it might be very difficult to get those areas developed.
So thanks for that comment. I don't know whether Michael or Rachel, it looks like, Michael, you want to?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. And I agree with you that if we had the statutory authority to introduce that flexibility, it would give the program or the incentive, I'm not supposed to say program, it would give the incentive the ability to do more, no question about it. But that would require a statutory change.
It's a great moment to rethink infrastructure investment and staging capital for infrastructure investment. I'll use another example in Missoula because they're doing a lot of great work out there. There was an opportunity fund that wants to make an investment along one of their priority main streets, but it needs redevelopment of the sewer line. The city wasn't in a position to appropriate the capital needed to do that this fiscal round, and so what they agreed to was having the opportunity fund front load the equity investment to repair the sewer line in lieu of tax benefits on the back end to make them whole for that investment. But for that sewer line being redeveloped, that fund would not be able to invest along that main street and create the tax revenue needed to repay. So it's cyclical, and I think this is the creative thinking that as I travel around, I get really excited about, and not necessarily needing to knee-jerk and go back to the toolbox we have, but rethink the tools that we're using.
Great, thank you for that comment. Another question?
Hi, my name's Tim Lee. I'm with Signet Partners. We are, among other things, setting up an affiliate to invest in opportunity funds in commercial real estate. And I guess my question: several of you have spoken about the need, and very deservedly so, the need to generate and standardize easily available data going forward on the performance of these funds. But as far as attracting investment, attracting capital, what might be very helpful is to gather and standardize existing data to make it easier to analyze candidate sites, candidate projects. I'm just convinced from the research I've done so far, there are going to be high-profile, large-scale projects that get a lot of press, that get a lot of airplay, but we're convinced that there are smaller projects that are very meritorious, but they don't have the visibility, they don't have the ease of data analysis and availability necessary to be found. I know it's a big ask, but it's also an ask, I think, with a lot of potential.
Mm-hmm. Really excellent point. I know this was a topic that came up in our Chicago conversations in terms of what city and other folks can do to help position projects that might be of smaller scale. Rachel or anybody else on the panel want to refrain?
I mean, just from what we're doing, and I would say it's probably not going to the detailed level of an investor to evaluate an offering, but our information exchange is an open exchange that enables folks that are seeking capital to list their projects, and those that have capital to list themselves, to identify themselves that they are seeking to make investments. And so, I would say that that's the first wave. The second or third wave would get to probably the stage that you're looking for is that I'll be able to put my parameters in just like you can in the stock market to be able to hone in on what is your target list of investments, right? And I think that we've done a first start or blush of doing that, but I think what you're asking is difficult, particularly if it's a real estate project, it's local, and local, you have to know the market, right? And so anybody who's investing in that market that's not in that market, they got to go through a partner to actually do that because the partner's going to know. And so like anything else, it's who's advising you or recommending you to get to that particular investment opportunity.
In addition to the state exchanges, which a number of states are creating these exchanges, they're not qualifying deals, they're not acting in a broker-dealer role, which is critical, but they're just providing information. I would point you to the prospectus documents, which have been issued by at least 30 cities at this point, which identify investable assets and businesses. So to some extent, communities are doing some of the legwork for investors in order to be competitive in attracting that investment, and so it's not a big ask, it's already happening.
Great, thank you for that comment.
Thank you. My name is David Hattis, and I'm with the Institute for Building Technology and Safety. My question has to do with public investment in opportunity zones. Mr. Dixon mentioned that there are programs that are interacting and channeling public investments into opportunity zones. Mr. Kressig, you're from St. Louis. You have a lot of flooding. You may have earthquakes. There is some evidence that natural disasters affect disadvantaged communities disproportionately. My question is, have you seen any evidence that HUD CDBG disaster recovery funds are going to be somehow targeted in some way to opportunity zones, either with some formula or some other aspect of the criteria of HUD CDBG-DR?
Yeah, so I'll say two things. I'll say that HUD just issued an RFI on proposed information for collecting some of this input publicly, which I think closed on June 17th. The other thing that I'll say is that look at Puerto Rico and what they're doing with their CDBG dollars. They just created a $400 million revolver with preferable terms, so it's mezz financing through a bucket of CDBG capital to help attract investment to Puerto Rico. And a big focus of what they're doing is around resiliency and disaster recovery.
Great, thank you for that question. Next question.
Hi, Sabrina Kaiser, Salvation Army's national headquarters. Obviously, opportunity zones are really important to the work we're doing because they're in the same communities that we're in. And so my biggest question would be when we're looking at kind of the outcomes and what the actual goals of these opportunity zones are, how is gentrification being addressed? Is it being addressed? And are there going to be safeties put in for people who've been in those communities for a longer time that are disadvantaged currently, but will have this influx of investment, and how do you keep those people safe in their place?
Mm-hmm. Good point. Robert raised this in his comments. Do you want to, anybody want to?
I think it's a very serious concern,
yeah.
And the point that I suppose deserves some reemphasis is that this can occur even if the program works, or let's call it the initiative. That's a term I like to use. Okay. Even if the initiative works. So if we do manage to attract investment, there is a possibility that this will have adverse effects on some current members of the community. That's a significant concern. It's a concern that can only be addressed through very careful, detailed program evaluation. And I don't see as yet much potential for that to happen.
Well, I wonder if any of the places that you've been working have gotten ahead of this. I mean, this is a concern even without opportunity zones, but the concern is that opportunity zones could accelerate the strategy. But there are other complementary types of policies that local communities can put into place to mitigate the risks that were just discussed. Are you seeing anybody using the opportunity zone moment to accelerate advancing those kinds of policies?
I haven't seen it. I mean, my general comment is on gentrification or maybe displacement is it really depends upon it's individual specific. Mm-hmm. And I had a question from an individual from a West Baltimore community get together, and literally her comment is that if there's any activity that would push people out of their neighborhood, just any activity. Now, I'm talking about a neighborhood where when you're looking down the street, there's one inhabited unit and there are eight vacant, right? Go to the next block, 2 inhabited, 8 vacant. And so it depends upon the individual and what their circumstances are, which then determines how they view it. And that was something new that I looked at. My general comment is from a gentrification specifically. I hope West Baltimore is able to say that they have gentrification, and that would happen sooner rather than later. I don't think that it's going to happen there. Certainly in other probably opportunity zones that are more developed, that already is existing. There are communities that are putting in place, I would say, rules and regulations that says what the revitalization would do, i.e. what rents you could probably charge, right? And so, that may help those that are living there, but then it also has a counter effect for those who may additionally invest in those areas. And so it is a marketplace, but people should be conscious of it.
Yeah, and I would just, to that point, want to decouple gentrification from displacement. Gentrification is a market indicator, for lack of a better phrasing around that, but displacement is a supply and demand issue. If there's more demand for affordable housing and affordable workspace and there's supply, there's going to be displacement. So to that end, I think it's really important that localities and cities be thinking about their affordable housing preservation policies, be thinking about how they're aligning their affordable housing trust funds with opportunity zone equity to provide that incentive. We're seeing that here in DC. We're also seeing it in New Jersey, that things are moving forward to that end. But we're also seeing that workforce housing, that 80 to 20, 120% AMI, that missing middle, is hugely attractive to investors. And again, I think it goes to the vacant row homes in Baltimore and the supply-demand issue. If opportunity zones could be used to increase the supply of workforce housing, I think it does a lot to relieve some of the downward pressure on more of the moderately and lower-priced units, B and C class properties, that right now are being inhabited by folks that could afford more workforce-style housing, but aren't, and therefore increasing the amount of affordability pressure on extremely low-income, very low-income, and low-income populations.
I think you raise a really important point, Rachel, which is one of my favorite quotes is from Angela Glover Blackwell, and she says, we need to think we're going to be successful. So if we think we're going to be successful, then what are the kinds of aligned investments we're going to do today? And I think the preservation of affordable housing when we're sort of making other investments aligned is really important and can help to mitigate the displacement and retain a place in the community for the people who've been living there a long time. All right, I think we have one final question from the audience.
Hi, my name is Shauna Davey, and I work with Greystone. We're a national multifamily FHA lender, among other items. We have in our pipeline several potential new construction projects located in opportunity zones to be funded with new opportunity zone fund equity, including projects reserved for tenants earning at or below 80% AMI with rents that offer a significant percentage advantage to market. So Secretary Carson introduced incentives encouraged by HUD, including reduced application fees and assignment to senior underwriters in the various regional offices. In the opinion of the panel, what are other things HUD could do to encourage these investments in the FHA Mortgage Insurance Fund?
What a great question to end on. What more, and I would broaden it too and invite you to not only reflect on that question, but since we are in HUD, we have a ready audience. What more can HUD do to support local efforts or other efforts to make opportunity zones work? This is we can do a round robin for your favorite list.
I mean, I guess one thing that would come to mind is they could adjust the underwriting standards, right? So, they could provide more liberal underwriting standards. I mean, they're pretty liberal now, but for projects that meet the criteria.
Yeah, I say when I'm traveling throughout the nation talking with communities, the biggest need they need right now is capacity building around planning. And so I think if there is a way to offer planning grants to communities that waive any sort of matching requirement that's associated with it for this specific use, I think it's really important. And the other feedback that I'm getting is that as these 150 actions are being evaluated through the White House Opportunity Revitalization Council, it's really meaningful to communities that those additional resources are being targeted at the census tract level, so to the opportunity zone, and not to the project or investment itself. And so it allows folks who aren't even involved in the opportunity zone transaction, because they are in an opportunity zone, take advantage of some of the additional resources that are being targeted.
Great. Rick, any thoughts on what more HUD
I'm not familiar enough about what HUD does, to be honest. I can't really answer the question. But the one thing that Maryland's doing that is similar to what HUD is doing is that they've actually expanded some of the, or providing preference to opportunity zone projects. And so we are doing the same, whether it's points that would be added to projects to get them over the hump if they're like on the line, right? And so I think in that case, speed of being able to get information, and so that is already happening within HUD. So TBD, I'll come back with more suggestions from my crew.
Well, they've invited comment, even though it's closed now, but I'm sure they still would invite comment.
I would just speak to there's a segmentation of opportunity zones, and there's also tens of thousands of census tracts that are in opportunity zones that also need revitalization. And so as the Secretary and as the Council and as HUD thinks about how to array resources, to be thinking not just about going deep and having a handful of opportunity zones benefit, but to think more broadly. I mean, the Revitalization Council is not just exclusively focused on opportunity zones, and so thinking a little bit more about some of these underserved places, and what could the business investment model be for rural and ultra low income communities.
Yeah. Robert, any final thoughts here?
Yes, focusing on the issue of evaluation, I think that the most important thing for HUD to do is to continue to press the Treasury Department and the Internal Revenue Service for the most basic evaluation data that are required here, which is the flow of investments that claim opportunity zone advantages. And without that, there really is no hope.
Yeah. All right. On that, we're going to need to wrap up. I want to thank the panelists. Please join me in thanking the panelists. I certainly learned some things I didn't know, so thank you for that rich conversation and set of presentations. Thank you to PD&R, to Kurt Usowski, to Eileen Faulkner, who led the development of this event today, and for inviting us to be part of the conversation. Very much appreciated. To Secretary Carson, who opened us up, really appreciated his opening and framing remarks. But most of all, thank you to those of you who joined us today in the room and on the webcast for your engaging conversations and attention. Thank you. Thank you.